Yeah, good work, guys. Like I said, it's been a fun semester. So. Now comes the not fun part, right? And that is the writing of the research paper. So here comes the not fun part, right? So I'm gonna hit the pause recording again. So we're coming up to the point in the semester where it's time to start thinking about what you're going to write about. Now that we've finished all of our reading, so now's the time where you guys need to ask yourself, what do you want to write about? Right? What text interested you the most? Maybe reflect back on what book, maybe even like what conversation about what book interested you the most. Because if you can even focus it down on something that specific, you're already on the right track. So it's a matter of the research paper coming up. It's a matter of applying a literary lens. So are you going to take a psychological point of view? Are you going to take a gender or race point of view or a sexuality point of view, right? Are you going to take a historical or maybe economic point of view? Do you want to maybe do an informal study or not an informal, a formal study, like where you mostly look at things like point of view or diction, word choice, right? Or you want to mostly do a study like that? So it's a matter of, right now, it's a point of asking yourself, how do you like to read literature? What subjects in discussing literature do you like to talk about? And how do you want to apply some type of subject to one of the stories we've read? Right. So there's hundreds, maybe thousands of possibilities here for what you could do. You can maybe even do some type of like influence study, or maybe you look at one author's influence on another. Right? We mentioned Lovecraft and Shirley Jackson a minute ago. But you can maybe even do some type of study like that. So this is a little more challenging than English 101 as far as picking a research topic goes. Because English 101, it's all about what type of political issue do you want to do. Now it's more of a matter of like what types of debates have we had about these books do you want to do, and what type of research do you want to look up. So here's what's going to happen, guys. So the first step of this research project coming up is you're going to do an annotated bibliography. So those of you who had me for English 101 last year, you guys remember the double logs we did? You guys probably, I see Haley's smile. It's a smile both of it's both a good smile and a smile of pain, right? Because she recalls how painful it was, right? But what the first step of this is going to be very similar to the double log. Okay, so you are going to be looking up some sources about whatever book it is that you think you want to write about. And the good news is I need to do this. Tomorrow afternoon, I'm going to spend some time uploading a bunch of stuff for you guys, because Southern doesn't really have good library resources to help us with literature. I'll be honest, but it's something we're working on. Maybe next year, the students will have more English type databases to look through. But you can find some stuff through our databases. I'm going to show you where to look here in a second. But I have collected a mini library of articles on all the books we've talked about. So I have collected a bit of a mini library, and I'm going to try to, of course, now we move from Blackboard to Brightspace. I have to create the library again. But I do have a mini library of probably a couple hundred articles that I've gathered on all this stuff. So what I will do on our Brightspace page, I will make a folder for all of our authors. So Poe, Lovecraft, Gilman, O'Connor, Faulkner, then Hill House and Frankenstein. I don't know if I have a lot of articles on Turn of the Screw, because this is the first time I've taught it, but I can dig around. But I do have a mini library, and I'm going to put them on our Brightspace page. You'll see, whenever I upload those, you'll see that there's tons of different articles that have different perspectives. So depending on what type of perspective you want to choose, some of those articles may be helpful, some of them might not. So at this point of the game, you guys should decide right now, right? Not at this present moment, sometime over the next day or two. You need to decide right now what book you enjoy doing the most. Maybe try to think about what type of conversation do we have about that book, what issue interested you the most. And you guys can actually take one of the short papers we've done and make it into a longer paper that has more research if you choose to. So that's a possibility for you to do. The short paper 2 was the adaptation paper, right? Where I said, look up an adaptation of one of these one of these books. That's a possibility. Like if you like short paper 2 is technically due soon, that's tomorrow, right? But if you enjoy doing the short paper 2, you can develop that into a bit of a longer research paper as well. Like if you really want to look at an adaptation of one of these, maybe think about differences and similarities and which one do you think works better. You can extend that out to a longer paper too. Like I said, now's the time to figure out which text you're writing about and maybe think of a perspective the way that you're going to write about what text. So you're going to write about psychology, you're going to write about race, gender, or sexuality, you're going to write about history, economics. How are you going to approach the text? So that's the big question to answer right now over the next couple of days. Okay. So let me show you first the prompt. I haven't uploaded this for you yet, but this is what we're going to be working on over the next week or two. We will have a Zoom next week. We're not going to be discussing a book or anything like that, but we will have a Zoom next week where I go over more stuff related to the paper. But part 1 of the paper is this. It's a bibliography. So an annotated bibliography on literary and or film researched argument. So basically what you're doing with part 1 here, I now can't see you guys where I'm sharing my screen. There we go. But what part 1 of this is it's a collection of data. So you're going to find as much stuff on this book as you can, whatever book you choose. And what comes with this is pretty much all the stuff I've picked. One reason why I didn't do a lot of contemporary fiction is because almost all the stuff we picked has a lot of stuff written on it. So you're not going to find a shortage of materials on any of these texts. The Haunting of Hill House probably has the least written about it that I found. But I have compiled a nice library of stuff on Hill House. But Frankenstein, Dr. Jekyll, Poe, Lovecraft, all those authors have a lot written about them. So the first step, you're collecting articles that are related to your book. So it's all about thinking about this like a conversation, right? You want to know what the larger conversation is that is happening about your book. So within academics, right, the best way to think about it is like it's a conversation, it's a discourse. So whatever book we choose, there's been a long-standing scholarly conversation happening about that book. And the goal is to kind of figure out what all people have argued. Because you don't necessarily want to repeat what other people have argued, right? Because then you're not necessarily doing original work. Of course, this is a 102 class. I'm not expecting you guys to do 400 level English major work, right? But I challenge you to do 400 level English major work, in the sense like the more original that you can make your paper, maybe something that hasn't been written on before. Maybe that's something that you can take later and maybe present at a conference or something like that. All of you guys in here are really bright people. I have had students who have gone on to present papers at big conferences and stuff. So maybe if one of you guys writes something really good, I challenge you. Maybe you write something really good. Maybe it's something you can go present at a conference, or think about maybe publishing or something. That would be pretty cool, right? So if you think of something interesting and unique and do a good job, that's a possibility. But the first step here is coming up with your topic and writing a bibliography on it. The bibliography, as you're compiling together, I'm asking for six sources. That's not really a bad number, 6. It's a little more lax than I normally am, actually. I normally ask for 8. But I'm asking for 6 articles on whatever book you choose. And whenever you find the articles, you're going to find stuff that's not really relevant to what you're doing. So maybe you find stuff about Frankenstein, and maybe you're doing nature versus nurture in Frankenstein, right? You might find something about, I don't know, something completely off the wall. Right? Like maybe you find an article about the scientist who Frankenstein based this work on, right? You find something kind of completely unrelated dealing with Frankenstein. So the challenge that I have is try to keep your articles as pertinent to whatever scope you're taking on your topic as much as you can. So if you're writing about race and Frankenstein, right, probably you don't want to talk about gender, right? You want to keep it as close as possible to what you're doing. They're as close as possible, right? Because sometimes there might not be a lot. So you might need to come up with as much as you can. So you're coming up with 6 articles. In your bibliography, I'll talk about the proposal part in a second. In the bibliography, your goal is to see what arguments are out there already, to see that you do not repeat something already said. And it helps you think through the text and come up with an idea for a topic yourself, which will in turn allow you to engage with the opinions of other scholars. You should search the library databases, especially Academic Search Complete and Southern's ebook collections on EBSCO. I'll show you where that is in a second. To find the sources, you can also look through Google Scholar. So you don't necessarily have to look at Southern. If you go to scholar.google.com, they have a bunch of articles on there that you can find as well. And so yeah, these are the places you look. So before you do look, though, try your best to come up with what book you want to choose, maybe what type of lens you want to apply to it. And that'll help you narrow down the articles you find. Because I'm asking for 6. 6 isn't really that much. So if you know what you're doing, you can kind of keep your articles as closely related to what you want to do as much as possible. So you guys see what I'm going on. If you go in with a plan, you can then look for articles that are about your plan. Right? So you're not going in blind. So an annotated bibliography is really simple. If you guys remember from the double logs, they're very similar. It's pretty much the same thing, just a different formatting. But when you do an annotated bibliography, you cite your source correctly in MLA style. Next week for the whole class, I will actually count this as an early week writing assignment next week. But next week we will practice doing MLA style, because we did that in 101, but all of you guys didn't take me for 101, so it's worth a refresher to go over how do you cite correctly in MLA style. Whenever you find an article, you're going to cite it correctly. Then you're going to summarize the article's argument and discuss the source's usefulness to your project and how it helped you to shape your thinking. So basically a citation followed by a short summary of what your source is about. Then a sentence or two at the end explaining how do you think this source is going to be useful to your project. Right? How are you going to tie this source in with your project? So it's basically a matter of collecting 6 sources that are as closely related to your project as possible, summing them up. You cite them, you sum them up, you briefly evaluate how useful it'll be to you. This is the first step of doing a research paper. You kind of understand what other people are arguing. It helps you come up with your own argument. And maybe your own argument's completely original. Or maybe your own argument, maybe you're extending, maybe somebody else wrote about something. You want to kind of build off of what they said. Right? Lots of ways you can go here. But the bibliography helps you understand what people are saying about your book. Then that allows you to write an educated analysis yourself, knowing what other people have said. Am I making sense here as far as why you do the bibliography? So, and I also asked for this first before the actual paper, because if I don't, what happens? If I say do a research paper, find 5 articles, what do people do? They'll randomly find articles, right, and just throw them in there just for the sake of throwing them in there without really reading the article, right? Classic strat, right? Classic strat. I'm asking for this part of the assignment first to keep you guys from doing that, right? I want you to be educated on your book, and I want you to integrate your. I don't want you just to find sources just for the hell of finding sources. Right? I want you to find sources that are really useful to you in thinking about your book. So part 1 of the project is pretty much your bibliography. And just to show you what it looks like, I gave you a sample proposal. But on this prompt, I'm also giving you sample bibliography. Basically what you do on the one, you cite your source correctly in MLE style. As I said, we're going to practice in MLE style next week. You cite your source correctly, and you go down in descending alphabetical order. So you start with A or B, and then you go down all the way down to Z. So you do your annotations, you alphabetize them. Okay. But you cite your source correctly. Then you sum up your source. And then really close to the end of it, you will analyze your source. How useful do you think it'll be? This student who I took this proposal from a long time ago did her project on a horror movie called The Babadook. She compared it. It's a great horror movie. She compared it to the Yellow Wallpaper, if I remember. So I remember her project was really cool. That's what you do. You have 6 of these entries going in descending order. I remember I gave her 100 because I thought that was a really good one. Okay. In a nutshell, that's what you do. You're going to find 6 articles. And you might find some articles that are completely irrelevant that you won't want to throw out. My advice here is don't pick the first 6 articles you find. Because oftentimes you guys all need to take some time and sit down and filter through them and see what's going to be useful to you and what's not. Don't pick the first 5 articles that you find on the database. Okay, so be selective. So that's part of what you do here with part 1. The other part, which isn't as bad, is the proposal. So you guys have all done something similar to this in English 101, even if you didn't take me, probably. A proposal is just simply your plan. Here's the plan for what you want to write about. So you kind of pitch to me your plan for your topic and the lens that you pick and what you think you're going to plan on arguing about your text. So think about it like it's the teaser trailer what your paper is going to be. It's the teaser trailer. So in a proposal, you detail the text you choose to analyze and why, what other scholars seem to be saying about the text. You don't need to do that a lot, just in a couple of sentences, because you're already summing up what other scholars are saying in your bibliography. But as much as you can there, maybe sum up what you think other people are saying about your book. So before you do the proposal, in a way, it's a good idea to do the bibliography first. And then the argument you plan to make about the text in the final paper, detailing the school of literary criticism you will use. By that, I mean, are you doing race, gender, sexuality, history, economics, psychology, right? What lens are you using to apply to the text? And then possible evidence from the text or film you will use to support your argument. So just like how we do in class, right, where we bring up passages, you know how I always do that on purpose, right? We always ground ourselves in the passages in the text. Think about what are some passages from whatever book you're choosing to write about that you will use to support your argument. So if you do all that stuff early, the paper will write itself after you do this, right? This is kind of forcing you to think what you're going to do, how you're going to do it. The good thing is, after you do this first part, the next part will be really simple because you will already have done your research. You already know what you're arguing. So by the time you actually sit down to do your paper, the final paper at the end, you'll have already have done the heavy legwork here after doing part 1 of this. So remember, in this class, the research paper is worth 50%, but this part of the research paper is worth 15% of that 50. Right? So you really want to do a good job with it. It's worth this part of the paper is worth 15% of your grade. And then the actual paper itself, you will do at the end, that'll be worth 35%. So the more you put into this, the more your final paper will be polished and good because of it. So on this prompt, I'm going to post this prompt for you. On this prompt, you have an example of what a proposal looks like. and as well as what a bibliography looks like. So you'll have an example that you can model yourself after. Okay. And I can dig up some other examples too. I just need to dig through my archives. But I have other good examples too that I might be able to dig up. So first, let me pause and say questions about this before I continue. Questions about the proposal, bibliography, and what you need to be doing right now. Or even if you guys already have maybe a possible topic idea in mind. You can mention that too. Maybe something struck your bell as I've been talking here. Maybe something you might want to write about. Feel free. I'll stop the share here, so we'll go back to all of us. But anything on your guys' mind about what to do right now, or questions about what we're going to be doing?
Do you mind to either post or tell us the different perspectives again? That way I can write it down or I can copy it later.
Yeah, I have a handout that I gave you guys at the beginning of class on that, but I'll repost it. That's a good suggestion, Jessica. I'll actually write that down. Repost literary schools. I can pull that up while we're sitting here. Just briefly go over it again. I'm not going to go in depth. We'll briefly talk about it. Yeah, here we go. So you guys probably remember this handout from the beginning. I think we might have even talked about it on the first day of class of the Zoom we did. But remember, you can do a biographical approach. This is for the English 200 class I teach. This handout isn't designed for us. I do have the one designed for us though. You can do a biographical approach. Remember, disability studies was a big school that's going on right now. We certainly talked a lot about that in here with Frankenstein and probably Dr. Jekyll, even Hill House, right? You could probably do a disability study of it if you want to think Eleanor is disabled in some way. You can do an ecological study, right? Ecological studies is when you look at literature and the environment together. We definitely have lots of interesting settings in this class. Is there sort of an ecological horror going on here, right? Maybe something to do with the way we treat the environment or something like that. That can be a possibility. A formal study was, as I said, something to do with the text. So that's like if you do a study of setting or a study of foreshadowing or a study of symbols or something like that. That's what a formal study is. Formal studies, you do a little bit of formal study in all of these different categories. Because whenever you quote the text, you're doing a formal study. So there's a little bit of this in all of these, but you can do a project that completely deals with the literature with a capital L stuff, setting, personification, all those terms, right? Similes, metaphors. You have gender and or race studies. Remember, sexuality comes in here too, right? So the study of gender in literature, the study of race in literature. We've definitely talked about some of that stuff in some of the works we've read, for sure. Even social class comes into that category too. In Return of the Screw, there's definitely a lot of social class stuff going on in that, right? So gender, sexuality, race, class. You can kind of look at literature through those lenses. I feel like a lot of you guys in here might pick this one because a lot of you guys in here have come up with some interesting hypotheses about different things. So like, for example, if you wanted to do a sexuality study of Hill House, right, you might write about Theo's role in Hill House, right? That would be a fun project. You can even kind of bring in all those crazy stuff we talked about today if you want. An influence study looks at the relationship between texts. So what's one author's influence on another? A psychological approach, oftentimes you'll bring in something like Freud or Lacan, right, to talk about a text. We've done a lot of that in our discussions throughout the semester, right? Remember we talked about Frankenstein's dreams, right? We talked about Eleanor, whether she's losing it or not, right? We had almost the same exact conversation with Turn of the Screw, right? So almost all these stuff we've done has something psychological going on. So you can either bring in one of these old theories like Freud, or you can even bring in some like modern psychology, right? Of course, you guys know modern psychology is a lot different than the old stuff like Freud. And if you've taken a psychology class, you know there's a lot of differences there. Modern psychology is more neurological and what's going on with your brain chemicals, right? More so than what older psychology is. You can also do some type of social, political, or cultural study. Oftentimes with horror, why is something scary? Because it was scary to the people living in that time, right? So think about Hill House. Why, for instance, here, right? Why is that part with the blood scary, right? Because female sexuality was scary to people living in the 50s and 60s, right? Think about how much they repressed women and stuff. That was before the sexual revolution in the 60s, right? So if you do a social, political, cultural study, that's mostly asking you to look at history in conjunction with literature. And personally, as far as who I am as a scholar, this is my category. I'm very much history brained. So anytime I've done scholarly work, my work's usually really history oriented like this. There's different strokes for different folks, right? So depending on how your brain works, you'll probably gravitate to one of these categories over another. So yeah, that's the whole purpose of doing all these discussions we've done in this class, right? So that you guys can kind of find a niche and maybe write a paper using that niche. That's the whole purpose of why we've had all of our conversations. And all of our conversations are recorded and put up on our Brightspace, so you guys can go back and return to those if you so choose. Maybe you want to write about Frankenstein, right? Well, maybe it's a good idea to go back to our conversation. And maybe that'll lead to some ideas. You can actually use their class discussion as a source if you want. So out of your 6 sources, I'll allow that. Or you can use our class discussion as a source. That will be fine. Okay. But like I said, I have a whole little mini library of materials that I'm going to upload. I'll let you guys know when I'm done with that, so that you can start to pilfer through it. I have a video that I've made showing people how to look through the Southern's databases. Next week, I'll probably take a little bit more time to do that with you guys. But I do have a video already made. So sometime over the next day or two, look at that video showing you how to look through Southern's databases. And watch that, and then maybe start doing your own searches. Okay. I'm not going to pilfer through the database in extreme detail, but I will show you right now how to get to the database in case you don't know. Okay. Like I said, our databases for literature aren't very good. That's one reason why I'm showing you why I'm going to upload a bunch of stuff for you. But you can find some stuff. So the way that you get to our databases here at Southern's webpage, go to My Southern, log in. I don't even know my own. Oh, I forgot I have to add the at Southern WV part. All right. You don't for Brightspace, so it always throws me off. But, log in. Also, guys, this is where you do the end of the semester course evaluation. So get on there and leave me a review, right? If, yes, say nice things, right? That's where you do that as well for all your other teachers. If you have a teacher who's a bad teacher, leave them a review too. But I'm not one of those, right? But to get to the library, you click library resource menu, and the internet here has been a little spotty on me today. Hopefully it'll take us there. Sorry guys, Southern's internet's been glitching on me all day. I thought it was the site giving me a problem, but no, it's the internet here at the office. Let me go back and to my screen. Let's see, here we are. So to retrace my steps since it messed up, click library resource menu, EBSCO host library database search. You click the very first thing you find here, and that is EBSCO host web. And once you get to this screen, we have different databases for different purposes. But my suggestion here is when you get to this screen, click to check them all, because we don't have that many. So go ahead and check them all. The only time I would say not check them all is if you want to search for book sources. Search just these two, ebooks. The difference in sources, a book source is oftentimes they are a lot simpler to read because books are designed for a general audience. Articles are usually designed for scholars. So oftentimes a book source will be more helpful to you than an article might be. And so yeah, search for just these two. Run a search with just these two at some point to see what you find. But for purposes of now, we'll search all of them. Like I said, I'm working on getting the English database for Southern, but right now we just got to work with what we got. So go to this screen. Something I would recommend you guys do if you didn't do so before. Once you get to this screen, create an account through EBSCOhost. Because if you create an account, maybe you start to look through it. Maybe you find some titles that are interesting. If you create an account, you can go back in. You can like save something to read for later. So you can actually kind of keep up with your articles that way. Maybe you read an article, then you're like, how did I cite it correctly? Well, if you keep track of them with your account, you can get back to it a lot easier. So the very first thing I would recommend you guys do once you get to the screen is click sign in and then create an account that you can go back to later. And that account will follow you if you go to another college later, let's say you guys transfer to Marshall or WVU or whatever, all those colleges use EBSCOhost. So your account will follow you later if you transfer. But let's just say here, I'm just going to search for Frankenstein. It's going to come up with 1,000 different things. Let's just search Frankenstein. 15,000 results, right? So no shortage of materials. But the best way so if you search something broadly like that, oftentimes you're going to come up with a ton of results. There's lots of ways you can narrow it down. You can kind of narrow it down for stuff published in a certain time frame. Maybe you just want to read articles about Frankenstein written from 1990 to 2022. Well, that took it down 1,000 articles or so. Not much. Let's do 2505. And that took it down a little bit more. So finding stuff that's just been written lately is always a good way to start narrowing it down. You can also narrow down the type of source. So for the most part, you want something from a scholarly peer-reviewed journal. So you click that, and that'll narrow it down a little more. Well, I narrowed it down to 747. So we're already getting to a place where we can start to do some digging. You can also, sometimes, guys, when you start to play around with this, there'll be sometimes when maybe you find an article title that sticks out to you. Like if you notice here, these first few articles, they have PDF full texts. So you can click that PDF full text and then pull the article up. Then you can read the article. Okay. Some things on here you can get immediately. Some things on here don't have that PDF full text. And, if you click one of these articles, it'll always give you a little mini summary of what the article is about. So you can kind of read over that and be like, okay, is this something that's going to be useful to me or not? And then you can kind of move to the next article if you don't think it is. Sometimes you'll find something that doesn't have PDF full text. If you run into that, all you got to do is copy and paste all this information from here up, starting with document type. So copy and paste all this information from here on up and email it to me, and I can get you whatever you need. Okay, because I use my WVU library subscription like I'm doing a crack deal or something, right? I can go through my WVU library and get it for you, where I still have access to there. So if you find an article you want and you can't get it, copy this info. This gives me all the info you need to cite your source. So I can go in and look for it and probably get it for you in a day or two. Okay, so if you start hunting, you find something you want that's not available immediately, don't despair. Just send me an email and I'll pull it for you. Okay, it'll just take a day, probably. But there's lots of ways you can play around with this to narrow your searches. So you can add another term in. So maybe nature, Frankenstein and nature. Well, that took it down to 60 results. You can kind of poke through 60 results and maybe find some stuff. Haunting a Hill House. There's only 9 articles in this whole database about the Haunting a Hill House. So if you choose to write about that, you'll probably have to use my archive that I will create for you. This is a really cool article that I've read. Help Eleanor Come Home, Monstrous Maternity, Shelley Jackson's The Haunting a Hill House. That's a really cool article. Picnicking at Hill House, Jackson's Gothic Vision of Heaven. Walking Alone Together, Family Monsters, and The Haunting of Hill House. So play around with it over the coming days. Maybe start to collect some articles together. Maybe start to read some articles. And as soon as I come up with my little mini library for you guys, you can look through those too. You should be able to find 6 sources or whatever book you choose. So that's how you get to it, and that's how you start finding some sources. As I said too, you can also use Google Scholar. Sometimes you can pull some stuff off Google Scholar as well. So that's another place you can look. So if you guys took English 101 with me, you should have already looked through these before, so you already know what you're doing. But I do have a video where I go more in depth about how you run these searches than I just did. I gave you kind of the quick lesson there. But I do have a video where I go more in depth that I'll provide for you. Okay. So back to the prompt real quick. What's our timetable here? You're gonna submit the first part 1, the bibliography and the prompt, by Monday, May 2nd. So really you have 11 days to get this together. On Monday, May the 2nd on Brightspace. And so you'll submit your proposal. That's your plan for your paper. And then you'll submit the bibliography like we have here, which is your sources. After you do this part, and you do a really good job on this part, I promise you guys the next part, the actual paper that you'll submit during finals week, that will be 10 times easier for you. The more effort you put into part 1 here, the easier the actual paper will be to write. So put your all into this first part. Then part 2 will write itself. So Monday the 2nd. So next week in class, the first part of the week on your own, you'll do that MLE citation activity. I'll give you a bunch of scrambled citations, and I'll show you how to put them in order. Okay. The worst thing you can do when you cite a source is use those generators. Don't use EasyBib. Don't use Microsoft Word to do it. Those things will usually mess you over. Okay, so I'm going to teach you how to manually do citing your sources next week. That'll be what you do early in the week. When we come together later in the week for our Zoom, I will probably go ahead and go over part 2, which will be the actual research paper part. I'll probably give you my lesson on that during the Zoom next week. So by the time we meet again, I'm going to assume you guys are somewhat far into your bibliographies. So maybe next week as well, we can all kind of have a round table discussion on what you guys are planning to write about. We can have a little bit of a round table there. And then maybe that'll strike some ideas for you guys. Next week, start working on this. Start doing your research, narrow down your topic. We can come together and have a round table about what you're doing. And then I'll go over to part 2 as well next week. Jaden, you unmuted there. You got a question?
Yeah, well,
So that's a lot. It's a lot. The next couple of weeks are going to be, it's a lot, but not too bad. Like the more you put into it early, the more trouble it'll save you later. Definitely get an early start. Don't procrastinate on this. Okay. I say that I'm never a person to take that advice myself, right? Try not to procrastinate on it. Like I said, if one of your short papers is something you really enjoyed writing about, develop it into a longer paper. That's cool too. Okay, that's one reason why you do the short papers. Maybe it'll give birth to a big idea for a larger paper. So you want to develop one of those into something longer, feel free to. Anything I can answer in our last couple of minutes? Anything at all? Okay, so I'll take your silence as complicity here. It's the silence of the majority, right? To bring the class full circle here, right? You guys are all sane, right? The silent consensus here. So, like I said, start your research, narrow it down over the next day or two, start your research. I'm also going to provide you a lot of research that I've done on all of these. So you can look through that stuff too once I get it up. And I'll try to grade your short papers. No promises. I'm going to try to grade your short papers that you're submitting tomorrow before next week too. I'll try my best. Okay. I'm still running behind. Doing that darn play just made me behind schedule for the whole rest of this term. So I'm still playing catch up. But I'll try to get to those as quickly as I can. Okay.
Just keep your contacts in, you'll be fast.
Yeah, I can see now, right? I'm telling you, it's like a whole new world that I suddenly see in, right?
Mm-hmm.
First time I put them in, I'm like, damn, all these callers outside, right? What's this all about? I don't know what's going on here. So,
Yeah, contacts are great.
yeah, well, like I said, you better get used to me like this because I can't wear glasses anymore. So here I am, the real me. So, all right, guys. So good luck over the next week. Get started. You guys know you can hit me up on an email anytime if you want some advice on anything. Even if you start looking through the databases, maybe you're running into some trouble where you might not find a lot. Sometimes that happens. If you run into a wall, let me know too, and I can probably help you. Okay, because I have access to a bunch of stuff through WVU, as I said. So I can more than likely help you if you run into a wall. But hopefully you don't run into a wall. Okay. Research is trial and error, guys. It's trial and error. It's hard work. Most of the time, you don't find what you need the first time you look. It's a constant going back and forth to the drawing board. So, but you guys will do good, and as good as you can in the limited amount of time we have, right? So until next time, guys, take care. You all have a good weekend. We'll see you again next week. Bye, everybody.